Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your lunch and also the morning sessions. I'm going to introduce our talk today. It's titled Navigating the Implementation Gap. I'm sorry if that sounds a bit double Dutch or unintelligible, but it's really exploring the gap between what was spoken about this morning, the importance of active environments. Where do people get these physical and mental and social benefits that were spoken about? Because they happen somewhere. And if something's going to be built, it needs planning permission. And how do you get from the need that we've been speaking about to built on the ground for the right people? We've got some experience in that, and I think we can all agree that the narrative has shifted from sport to active in recent years. And the gaps in the system have been mentioned this morning. Planning less than transport, but both of them are really big issues. And this talk, we hope, will enrich you with some ideas of how to navigate them. So let's get cracking. The implementation gap. The heritage of this statement is a conversation with Sport England. In fact, this is their slide. They said, we know where we want to go. We want stronger communities, better places to live, healthier, happier residents. Hooray, so do we. We've got the evidence-based tools, they say. We can define the need. So where's the gap? Well, the gap is Sport England don't own land. You need someone who owns land at a scale to control all of the things that will create an active environment. So we're not talking about 6 homes. We're talking big scale. Universities have been quite good at doing it, and there's some experiments that we can draw knowledge from. But we are now seeing the developers come to the table and say, we want to be part of this, but we don't know how. Then the other part is collaboration. All the things that were spoken about this morning with different silos coming together and a system-led approach. It's absolutely right, but it's not easy. And you have to approach each project and each group of people that you talk with uniquely. You've got to listen to them and engage with them and work out. You can't turn up with a product. You have to have a process of engagement and build trust to get those silos to knit together. And then people want examples. So if a developer is going to move from putting pitches and courts down to discharge their planning duties, they're going to have to make a case for it being something else. What is that something else? How do you work that out? How do you build that case? If you want the planners to sign off something that isn't enshrined in a playing pitch strategy or facilities strategy, how do you convince them you're not trying to dodge a cost, that you actually have a moral standpoint where you think you can do better with the land that you own and the environment you'll create? And these are the challenges that face us. But it's positive. We've got 3 people here. We've got a developer. So the one in the room is here on the stage, and he's going to talk about what his company is doing around Happy Healthy. We've got a physical literacy expert. We'll come on to what that is, but essentially tuning in, engaging with all of those audiences that were spoken about this morning, decoding, well, what do we need to put on the ground for you then? Because someone needs to be advised what that is, what the outcome that's desired, for someone to create a design brief, for someone to draw it, for someone to price it, someone to get planning, someone to build it, before it's used. So we have to go all the way to the outcomes, decode them, repackage them, get permission, build them, use them. So Trevor decodes it. I design it. That's why we're here today. So let's take a look back. Let's start with global perspective. According to WHO, the World Health Organization, approximately 5% of the global population die through the results of physical inability. That's an outstanding and frightening number. Okay, let's be hopeful. Our own NHS England have recognised that design has a role to play in overcoming some of these things. That's very good. Let's do a sit-rep, though, of where we are. Let's get a little bit more granular about the things that the 3 parties on this stage are looking to grapple with. The Children's Commissioner this year said that children are the least active ever. The subtext of that is that areas for unsupervised play have shrunk by 90% since the 1970s. That's a pretty huge reduction. Sport England, in their latest Active Lives survey, so about 27% of adults are inactive. Let's put that into context. 12.4 million people. That's a huge number of people. The NHS spends a lot of money that we could argue would be spent on other things. Our leisure centres, if this is where we want to be active, let's just recognise that 2/3 of them require significant investment just to keep them going. That's to maintain the status quo. But if we're not in our leisure centres, statistics say that about 37% of us choose to go outdoors. And reports from Natural England this year have said that the countryside cannot sustain the recreational pressure on it, and this has led to a freeze of development in certain areas. And the impact of that development is, one example would be 5,000 homes with 3 schools, 130,000 square metres of employment, is now held because of the pressure of a piece of land 12 kilometres away from this development. We are going to have to show how we're creating these active environments to not only be right in their location for their communities, but also take the pressure off the existing environments that are out there. So let's just recap. 37% of people choose to go outdoors. That's important for us because we're talking about active environments in the outdoors here. This isn't a leisure centre talk. So who have we got? Let's do some quick intros. I'm Andy Myton. Got Ben Phillips, Trevor Smith. These are the better photos. We're personally and professionally invested in the public realm that supports active environments. My role is to enhance lives through design. Ben is to champion happy, healthy places. And Trevor brings physical literacy and the engagements with all of the different people and how they can be active. At this point, I'm going to do the first handover, which is to Ben to talk from the developer's perspective. He'll be followed by Trevor, and then I'll come in at the end and we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon. Okay, so I work for Land Improvement. We are a land promoter and a master developer, and I appreciate that probably doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people in the room. So what does a land promoter do? We identify and acquire land that we think could be suitable for residential development in the future. We then promote that through the planning system, through local plans, and culminating in a planning consent, hopefully, in the future. We then also deliver the infrastructure, the core infrastructure that's required to open it up. That usually does require, as Neil was saying earlier, the roads, the highways, it's the drainage, it's the open space, it's the utilities. And then we will sell off these parcels to house builders who do what they do best, which is build homes. We don't do that. We also stay in throughout in our larger schemes to make sure that these are controlled and delivered in the right way and influence the strategy for how those are delivered. And that can go many ways, how housing development is delivered. So we, Land Improvement, we are part of Telereal Trillium, the largest privately owned property company in the UK. And actually we were on this sort of happy, healthy journey for being on it for a while, very much aligned actually with how Sports England are thinking about it. So why am I here? Why am I here with Andy and Trevor today? So all large residential developments will require a significant amount of open space to be delivered alongside it. Typically 30 to 50% of the scheme will be open space. And I think that's a huge amount of potential that can be used in many, many interesting, productive ways, both to help the new residents at that new development, but also usually these schemes are next to existing settlements to help and work for those residents as well. Equally, we as a land promoter, we're involved in the very early stages of the master planning. We lead the direction it goes on, us and anyone involved in that across the industry, and that's where lots of the thinking first comes in. Again, this echoes quite a lot of where the session before lunch with Neil about that getting the designing in early, that can set the way, the direction that these schemes go from an early point. And there's a lot of these schemes across the UK. And I guess probably worth saying at that point, a lot of these open spaces, the opportunities are being squandered right now, I would say. So as I say, we were on the Happy Healthy path, very much aligned with where Sports England are. This is our placemaking goal, to deliver happy, healthy places. And a big part of that for us is around the quality of the public realm, the open space, our core infrastructure, and how it's actually used to the benefit of the residents. We've got 5 sort of pillars, I suppose, that support that goal, and was almost like what would success look like if we look back on this in 10 years' time. So I can get this to work. So when we look at these five pillars on the outside, active environments are actually critical or important to all of them. So places with dynamic and thriving public spaces speak for itself. If we get active environments, we will get there. Places that make healthy and sustainable ways of living the natural choice, likewise. Places with engaged and proud communities, activity, interaction, social interaction at the place you live in. Active environments will help get to that point. Places that are inclusive for all generations. Active environments should be working for everybody. And places that protect and preserve and enhance nature. Active environments should be working with the nature, the natural environment and the open spaces that we're delivering. So actually, active environments wasn't the way we looked at this to begin with. But when you look at it now, they are core to what we're doing as a business. So I'm just going to talk to you about the scheme that I lead, which is called Linmere, which is to the north of Houghton Regis, near Luton, up the M1. It's a 600-acre urban extension. Context-wise, it does adjoin onto an existing urban area. It's 5,000 new homes. That's, we don't know, but let's say 12,000 population when it's delivered. That would make it the 6th largest settlement in its own right within Bedfordshire once it's delivered. The open space on this site is enough to house every football pitch from every football team in the Football League, so 92 football pitches would fit in the open space. It's a large scheme. It's got a lot of potential, and that in turn is a lot of responsibility on trying to do the best we can to make a thriving place there. So there's lots I could talk about the journey we've been on this, but a lot of it will actually echo what Neil talked about earlier around coming in late to a scheme, looking at how it's been designed to date, the discussions you have with particular officers at the local planning authority, highways in particular, and the computer says no is so relevant to a lot of our discussions on this. And trying to get that holistic thinking has been a key challenge. So I came onto this project after the planning consent, a few years after the thinking had started behind how we were going to deliver it. And that allowed me to question some of the thinking that had gone on before, because I was unencumbered by that past. One of the first things I did was go and visit other large sites and see how they were doing it. I guess one of the things that I was most struck by was the quality of the open space and how uninviting a lot of the green space was at these developments. How little people were using it, and how uniform the play provision was across these sites. And I was quite new to this then. I was like, well, how has this happened? They've got a planning consent, they've got planning obligations, there's a Section 106 agreement which means they should deliver in a certain way. How has it got to the point where this has happened? So I guess that sort of flags something that Andy said earlier. This is part of that implementation gap that's been flagged by Sports England. Something's gone wrong in here, in this delivery, that means that these active environments and making the most of these assets, it's not happening. So a key part of the first stages at Linmere was we had a landscaped scheme, spending a lot of money on creating this nice sort of entrance into the scheme. But I was really worried that we might end up delivering a really expensive landscape green space. It met all our conditions, but that no one actually used it, and people just waved at it and looked at it as they drove past it into their home. And that's what I wanted to avoid. So I want to see our spaces used by everybody, the whole community, have something for the whole community that they could use every day. And it's not just used by the active people and not just used by 22 people on a Saturday morning for 90 minutes and then left for the rest of the week. So that was my sort of layman's way of looking at it when I came into this. And our design team then started approaching it and thinking about this in a different way and questioning things that they had taken as read for a number of years, and since the very first day they first started thinking about this scheme and going, well, actually, does it need to be that way? Which was great. But then we went into sort of discussions with the planning authority and the relevant officers to try and persuade them of thinking about it differently, to persuade them, to think in their individual areas, to think about it differently, but think also at this holistic, strategic level, can we think about what we're trying to achieve at this site? And we struggled, to be honest. We actually failed to make many inroads and get away from what had been set down in stone a few years ago through the original master plan, the original consent. So, in a way, there's another implementation gap there. Even though we've got a willing developer on the board here wants to do things better and wants to find ways to make the most of the space for existing residents and new residents, we weren't getting anywhere with that. And one of the key challenges on that, particularly thinking about the leisure side, and there's challenges across the board in highways and other areas, is trying to convince them that we are not just a developer who's trying to cut corners and not meet our obligations, which is, I think, understandably, I can see where they're coming from, you know, given how some developments come forward. So that these obligations, I think, it's dawned on us that the way that they approach this is there's guidelines in place about the standards that need to be met in terms of play, in terms of sport, and they are there to ensure that a certain base level is delivered. And I understand that, I do get that, but that in turn means that there's no ability to be creative and innovative and think of better ways, and the developer can't do that, and actually that it inhibits us, and it also, though, to be honest, I think more importantly, inhibits the officers. They can't think beyond what the criteria is. And I think that's been a very big concern for us. We've recognised that. We've recognised that issue. And we realised we couldn't do it alone. And luckily, I met Andy and Trevor. And we realised that we actually have very similar ways of thinking about what these environments can bring to a development. Luckily, their understanding of this and their approach to it is much more rigorous and sophisticated than my very basic layman's view. So we could bring them in to help us take the local authority on a journey, bring them on board early on as to why we're doing this, what we want to achieve. And Trevor, I'm going to hand over to Trevor now, who's going to talk through parts of that approach that we've taken and that journey that we're currently on with this project.
Thanks, Ben. It's exciting, isn't it? If I look and sound excited, it's because I am. And absolutely brilliant to follow Neil earlier, because as I said to you before, I'm hoping we'll give you a shining example of what you are advocating. Quick bit of context: I came into this kind of world and this piece of work after 30 odd years in sports development, physical activity development, leisure services, that whole kind of standard sector, and absolutely not proud of it, because in 30 odd years we're still no further forward than we were when we started. So the opportunity to actually do something that's a little bit challenging, that steps outside the box, that asks questions of the systems and the frameworks that we put in place, was too good to resist. So I was absolutely delighted to get the nod from Ben and Andy. And what we tried to do with this is almost park the rule book, just in that devil's advocacy, creative friend, sort of creative coach kind of role. And we've used a construct and a philosophy that I came across about 4 or 5 years ago and wish it had been there 35 years ago, because for me, it actually helps us all define the work that we are all involved in if our role here is about positive health and well-being and physical activity. And it's a construct, and if you're familiar with it, forgive me, because I'm going to talk to you about it again, but it's physical literacy. Physical literacy is cropping up more and more. These two documents make the point well enough for us to understand. It's a phrase, it's a concept, it's an approach, it's a lens through which we can take any piece of work that we're involved in to help us reach the positive outcome. But do we know what it is? So we know the phrase. It's becoming ever more used. But this is what we're talking about with physical literacy. We're talking about intrinsic outcomes. Motivation, confidence, competence, knowledge and understanding to value and take responsibility. This is about the individual. And our assertion is that much of what we do in planning actually puts that outcome at the end of the process. Andy and I were standing here 3 years ago rehearsing the question and rehearsing that sort of that kind of construct. What would happen if the planning authority, the designer, the developer, and the people were in the room at concept stage of a development? Would you see the same outcome that you see now? Play England says it itself. When it goes around the country, it sees homogeneous play areas popping up all over. They all look exactly the same. What does that say about its understanding of the people, the culture, the history, the aspirations of the population that live in that community? It's just a model response. So let's put the people at the very heart of the process. And essentially, that's what we've done. Physical literacy is unique as an approach to this piece of work. One, because it is by definition inclusive. It's about every single one of us. We all have a very, very personal relationship and story with physical activity and with sport. And every one of our stories is different, which means we cannot take a homogeneous approach to provision. And we cannot make assumptions about what you all need in the place that you live. You know that. You feel it. You have that aspiration if you're invited to engage in that kind of conversation. And yes, we can't do everything for everybody, but what we can do is at least be sensitive to the people who might be or who want to be living in this particular development. And we need to understand that, and we need to anticipate it. So physical literacy literally hinges on all of our responsibility to give every single individual a purposeful and a valuable and an engaging experience. And the environment is key to that. Whether that's a social environment, an emotional environment, or a physical environment, we need to provide the space for people to have a positive experience. And with that then comes the personal development, the confidence and the motivation, the health and well-being, the human flourishing. That stands to reason. It's obvious when we think about it, because that's the space we all live in, internally. If we have more confidence, we'll be more motivated. If we're more confident and more motivated, we'll probably increase our competence. And with that comes the appreciation of what goes on. The story, I don't know if you were in Muir Gray's presentation, the lady with the pink hair. That was physical literacy in action, because she had an experience, she was given the confidence to step into a different place, she moved, she grew in confidence, she grew in motivation, she became a walk leader. It changed her life. So it's fairly simple. So if we apply this to our environments, that's about the people, I suppose, but the people is everything in a development. A healthy, happy place will only be so if the people there are experiencing it. It's all about the person. So if we're taking this physical literacy approach, then it absolutely crystallizes our thinking down to the day-to-day experience. What will every single resident experience, feel like, be motivated to do the moment they leave their homes? If they see the car, what will that motivate them to do? If they see the bike or the scooter or an attractive pathway, what are they most likely to do? Or do they have to go out the back door and down the garden to get into the car? So what's that experience like for every individual on a day-to-day basis? A lot of our facility planning models will focus on the facility. We've already heard people don't necessarily use a facility, and if they do, it's probably once a week for a regular thing. This is every day being active. So that lens allows us to take the approach to master planning that we're talking about a process. It's a thought process and an evolutionary process and a social process and a sensitive process. It's not a product to tick a box to get through the planning regulations to move on to the next step, to sell the first piece of land to the first house builder who's going to create the place that puts the money into the developer's pocket. This is a process. It's organic and it will grow. So a lot of the decisions that the facilities planning is asking us to make, it's too early. How do we know that this place needs 11 pitches? 11 pitches for what? We don't even know what aspiration or what motivation people want. We don't know that they need pitches. They might actually want a green sward with fields and trees and pathways. Who says it needs pitches? So it allows us to ask these kind of questions. And of course, that's only just scratching the surface. But will it motivate people to be active? Does it need to look and feel in a certain way to appeal to the community? What's the cultural context? You can't take a formulaic approach to these things, because you put 30 houses in one community, it'll look and feel and smell and taste different to 30 houses in a different community. Where is it? Where's it rooted? What matters? What's the cultural history? What's the heritage of the place? How can you celebrate the community and everything about it that you're putting these properties into? And will the environment make it easy for our practitioners, our parents, our teachers, our coaches, our facilitators, our activators, our social prescribers? Will it make it easy for those people to provide a positive experience? If we're prescribing walking, then actually is there somewhere that's appropriate for them to have that experience? Is it accessible? Is it achievable? Is it amenable? Is there a bench every 50 metres or so for that person who's just starting to walk again? Let's think about all of those individual contexts and those individual opportunities. So our process through doing that, and through consultation and discussion with many of the authorities and organisations in the area, which will trickle down then into more local residents, allows us to create this kind of framework, this kind of model, which understands perhaps what opportunities we can provide for different population sectors and in different environments and situations, what could be achieved within an active environment, and that becomes then part of our master plan. So where are these things that we need? This is, there's detail in this, and this is the one that was applied particularly to the Linmere development. But our process is about the people. So it begins on the left-hand end with our group. This is the community. We're building a healthy, happy community. And who's going to be in this community? And therefore, what do they need? So at Linmere, some very simple examples. One of them was the creation of that little matrix, that consultation system. We're building that picture, that framework, by talking to different people and local people as time goes on. We've also had some real success with the local authority, where we've been asking those questions. For example, about the play area, the classic thing on the play area that says, this development needs 14 leaps, if you know what that is, and 14 laps. So a lap is a little tiny 3 or 4 piece bit of play equipment that's stuck in a corner somewhere, and the leap is something a little bit bigger. And the local authority criteria says to be a lap and to be a successful one, it needs to have, what do you say, a slide, a swingy thing, and a springy thing. So long as it has those, it's fine, and it'll pass the tick box exercise. Our question on physical literacy, how does that help people learn and grow and develop motivation to be physically active? How does it help their physical development or their cognitive skills or their social skills? How does it provide that experience? A springy thing, what has a springy thing ever done to anybody in a play area? I don't know. So it allows us to ask those questions because we're taking this physical literacy approach. And the local authority, to its credit, has said, okay, let's get together and let's revise the criteria that we've been using to assess the play provision that you're proposing within this development. And we're now working to that also with the sport and the facility provision and mix. So let's think of a different way. So do our play areas allow young people or the users? Why are they just for young people? If Granny's taken granddaughter to the play area, why don't we put a little garden or something in there? Or to have something there, why do we have to have this all fenced off? Let's create a place that's a destination for everybody to get an experience from. So does it allow them to be physical or social or creative, aware, conscious of themselves and their place in the world, connected to the communities and neighbourhoods around them? Do they feel safe? Why don't we use that as our outcome measurement and not think about whether it's springy or swingy? Because that's giving something to the whole personality of the environment. And why 14 of this and 14 of that? Why not something completely different? And we've been able, through this approach, to encourage the local authority to step back from what it's thought was its stable position, It's dropped the algorithms, it's dropped the computer models, not completely. We need to help it learn to be comfortable stepping out of that box. And they're coming with us on the journey. And we're very, very excited about where it might go. That's me.
Trevor, thank you very much. We've got the best job. We really are enjoying going on this journey. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, these aren't answers, these are cues. So I mentioned at the outset, people are looking for examples of what's been done differently, where can I see it, where can I take comfort that this might work. So I've got a small number of projects to show, but before we do that, this diagram is just a little aide-memoire to us. Sport and leisure, they can happen in a similar space, they overlap, they don't need a building. We take the example of education of young children increasingly going into forest schools. Get wet, get cold, it's fine, it's good for you. Could we do the same approach with being active? Skin is waterproof, the body is a furnace. Let's get used to being outside. It's just one extension of something that's already been taken as good practice. And then buildings and landscapes both have the ability to deal with our leisure needs. But most important is, however we do it, it's got to be inclusive and it's got to be sustainable. So as an architect, I'm going to say something quite strange. Build less. Nature first. So what we're going to do now is look at some themes about how we can build less or achieve more with less, how we can stimulate behaviour change, how we can do this in balance with nature, and then just a little bit of lockdown learning and views from afar, and then we'll bring this session to a close. More with less. This is a big outdoor park. It's huge. There's lots of more. So on the left, top left, we can see Regent's Park in London. It was actually dominated by sport when it could happen, because you'll see the grass is really yellow. So in summer, you can't play on it. And in the bottom, in winter, it was really wet and you can't play on it. But there was so much of it that there wasn't really anything for anyone else to do. So when sport did happen, anyone else using the park got a frisbee or a football around their head. And there was a conflict. There was no hierarchy of space. But also, all of the grass was mown to be pitch level. So ecology and nature didn't really have a chance to flourish. On the right, the green lush image, that's more sport in less area with more park, used by more people more of the time, all year. And that's really important because around this area of London, which we'd all expect to be very high net worth, which it has, it also has 5 of the most deprived wards in Westminster. And where are they going to play? In the park. So the park has to be there for the times they want to use it. So my message here is you can achieve more with less with things that you can't actually see. Good drainage, good grass sward selection actually made the difference. It's not about kit. And has it worked? Well, it's long enough ago now for us to revisit. And these aren't us saying it worked. This is people telling us how it worked and sharing their photographs. It was built in 2004. It's coming up to sort of 18 years old, and it's hugely successful across a whole diverse range of community groups. There does come a point where you do need a building, but then you can do more with less with that too. So outdoor provision does require some ancillary changing. We put it all below the ground. What that does is enable you to have all of that space using less energy, because the natural banking, which provides a wonderful place to roll up and down as a child or sit on and view, also provides thermal mass, reducing the energy use of the building. So it's two things working in harmony. Then on top, you get a little pavilion, which is where people can choose to congregate, whether they're there for sport, leisure, recreation, or social. And then the building itself becomes somewhere else to gather as a community for fairs. It brings people together. And you can take it even further. We don't always need a changing room. So why don't we design them so that we can open them up and use them for meetings or Pilates? That image on the bottom right is a football changing room being used by a corporate entity for a meeting. It's the same space. We can do more with less if we're willing to innovate, and the people who currently, the stakeholders we're looking to bring in now to their silos, allow us trust us to innovate. That image on the bottom right is going to feature in future guidance by Sport England 18 years after it was built. It's taken that long because they didn't think it would work. Someone's got to be brave here. And we think, working with developers like Ben, we can be. My last point on more with less, we did say there's more nature. You can see here that not only is there a variety of trees and the long grasses, but look what people are doing in them. People are sitting and relaxing. That's as important to people's physical and mental well-being as being busy. And the last point on more, these are the words from a group that we didn't know, we hadn't identified in the consultation, the Baker Street Irregulars. This is one of the darkest skies in London, and unbeknown to us, they now use it for their monthly meetings, point the telescopes to the sky, and they've created this whole new community there. And we can do more. Since this building was done, we've got advances in the technology around artificial and hybrid pitches. So this site is now a test site for Sport England on hybrid pitches. Now what does that mean? That means in the future, we could probably do more in the area we've got. Or we could take a grass pitch out and put more nature in and still have the same sporting use. So you've got to keep on top of what we can do around the theme of making space for everybody and space for nature. So the next point was see it, do it. This is behaviour change. I think somebody mentioned it earlier. It's obvious if you put it in the way people do it. I wish I got this talk done first because I wanted to claim that. But the project itself is an urban example, so it's in contrast. And here we were asked to create an active environment around an attractive, walkable landscape. We'd all quite like to live in one of those. And we started with engagement. It predated my awareness of the IPLA, but the process was very similar. You talk to people, you listen to them. Nobody asked for sport. They wanted fun. They wanted all of these things that you can see. There isn't a court mentioned, a pitch mentioned, a slip resistance, a floodlight, a fence specification. That didn't matter. These are the outcomes people want. And key amongst them are, we need a space to switch off. We have doing addictions. So active environments are also places to relax. We want freedom to create our own games. And if we can see it, we're more likely to do it. So what can we do with that? And how can that be a prompt for the future? So this is the image. The buildings are deliberately blanked out because we wanted to focus on all of the space between them and make sure it played its part. We call it activating the infrastructure. And if you take the view that infrastructure is necessary, it's always going to be funded. If we can find a way of giving it a second use, it can't be argued that it's a benefit and gets taken out. So our whole approach here was to explore, if you've got a road that enables the bins to be collected and the food to be dropped off, does it have to look like a road or could it look like a running track? If you've got an artificial surface, which means people who choose to be active outdoors can do that all year without worrying about getting dirty, does it have to be square with white lines or can it be an irregular shape with no white lines? And what does that subtlety mean? Well, the feedback is, if you put a line on there, it talks to somebody. It says, I'm your sport, because a line is normally synonymous with the sport, as does the shape. If you take it away, it says, there might be somewhere else to sport for you. And in this context, there absolutely was. So leave this for someone else. And that's what's happened. So other things to consider in the public realm, you've got to remember this is where people live. And when we're creating our active environments, you've got to be sensitive to what it feels like to be in them as the person visiting and what it feels like to be the person living there who's having other people around them. The example is, we're all very happy with the postman dropping something on our letterbox. We're less happy if they go around the back of the house and knock on the back door. And that's not right. So when we're providing these environments, there are lots of things in the design of them that need to be considered very carefully. And it's important, and what I would like all of you to think about when we leave here is, what can you tell us through upcoming webinars about the learnings from the people you are in contact with about what's successful and what's not successful in the ways you are using activity to enhance their lives physically and mentally? That information we can take and use for the benefit of other people in future designs. And that, for us, is a really strong value of being here today. So this is the active infrastructure. I'm going to talk about lines and things with a dual purpose. On the top left are a set of steps. If you look carefully, they go nowhere. There's grass at the top and grass at the bottom. What are they doing? They're there for the people who want a beer and a pizza to sit in the sun and relax. But they're also designed with the input of biomechanists, so we understand the stride pattern for people who want to use them for the boot camp. Dual purpose infrastructure. The climbing wall on the bottom left, the site wasn't flat. So if we're going to have a retaining wall, we're going to make that retaining wall useful, giving it a second use, and so on and so on. But the really aha moment, and the bit that made us very happy, was the quote. After a year of use, we went back and were told it hits our subconscious to be more active. We don't know why, but we like it. Now, isn't that the sort of place we want to live in? We think there are clues out there that we can take and we can apply. Okay, harmony with nature is a single slide. You'll recognise the image that we had on the cover slide. And someone commented earlier it's the Jubilee River, and it absolutely is. But if you look up the Jubilee River on the internet, it's called hydraulic alleviation. And it's actually designed to stop winds of flooding. It's a piece of infrastructure that can't be argued against. Great expense put that there. But who's it used by? It's used by a Paralympian to swim with their family every Sunday. There's no facility. They drag their bottom across the grass and into the water. I've watched it. It's used by everybody and anyone, from grannies to kids, fishing, walking, cycling, kayaking. But it's not designed or badged anywhere as a place for leisure and recreation, but it does it. So we have the view we should be looking out for the infrastructure. Ben said he's got 200 acres of infrastructure. What can we do with that if we apply this sort of thinking? I believe we can do a lot. And then we're just going to close down on lockdown learnings. Lockdown was fantastic because we got to see how people use the environments and ask questions of them. So the individual on the right who's shadowboxing is a boxer. They wouldn't normally be outside doing this. So we asked them, what is it that made you feel comfortable doing that there? And they said the white lines. It taught to me that this was a place for activity. So in this instance, that's a positive white line. And then the gentleman in the middle with his dumbbells on a step box in a kiddie's park. Why are you here? I'm here because my feet aren't dirty and I can tie my resistance equipment to something. Who has ever thought about putting just a dry surface and a bar to tie things to in a public space and what value it could give people? And then on the left, we've got people just running in the park. They love a bank, but we need to provide a bank that won't wear out if people do it all the time. That's quite simple to fix. And then learning from afar. The images I've shown in the UK, I'm going to say they're pretty normal, pretty bog basic. We should be able to do this every day. We need to just move our planning system forwards to recognise that this is good thinking and it will be impactful, and all of us have a role in bringing that message to them in a way they understand it and buy in and feel comfortable. Once we're comfortable, we might also show them what they're doing abroad. They really are a bit bolder than us on a town square level. Lots of invention, lots of excitement, lots of good research behind it, but that's really for another day. I think it's time we let you go on to the next session and just wrap this one up by saying we believe that together we can navigate this gap that was identified. We're excited about doing it, and in future we want to come and show you what we've done. And with your help, I think we'll do better than we can imagine just now. So thank you.